government is being urged to take a tougher approach to China over their attempts to hack the Electoral Commission and their targeting of MPs. The former Cabinet Minister, Robert Jenrick, has called the UK's response feeble and said it would only embolden Chinese aggression. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the author, of The Fire of the Dragon, China's New Cold War, Ian Williams. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Ian, you listened to the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, yesterday talking about this, no doubt. He didn't seem to go far enough for many people. What do you think?
Well, I don't think China's cyber spies are going to be exactly quaking in their boots after that. When you think about the extent of the cyber espionage, the interference operations, the disinformation that's come from Beijing over the last 2 decades, this isn't something which is new. Then the response is really inadequate. It's not something we didn't know about. It's been extensive, it's been brazen, it's been pretty full on, and that it's taken this long for the government to, well, effectively sanction 2 individuals and 1 company is not going to be taken terribly seriously by adversaries in Beijing.
Tell us why they're so reluctant. I mean, you might say it's obvious because China is such a big trading partner, but getting that sort of difficult dance together, I mean, how should we actually interact with China, do you think, Ian?
Well, I think that part of the reluctance to call China out on its cyber espionage is partly because I think the government, the intelligence agencies have previously been quite cautious about revealing their hand, because if you start to point to organizations and individuals in China, then it could well reveal your own tactics. But I think that what's happened now is it's become so extensive that the intelligence agencies, the government thinks that it is a good sanction to call them out to embarrassment, to embarrass them and show what we know and what they're doing. But the reluctance to call them out is tied up very much with the relationship with China, because the government has been reluctant to call China a threat. It's come up with all sorts of permutations, a systemic rival, robust pragmatism in our relationship with them, almost anything apart to avoid calling China what is actually pretty obvious, and that is a threat. China, in its behavior internationally and its repression at home, is a threat to Britain, to Western democracy. But the government has been very reluctant to do that because it fears...
A lot of those words that you've used there are, you know, with the greatest of respect to those who came up with them originally in government, a bit of a word salad. There's not a huge amount of meaning there. But if Oliver Dowden or indeed Rishi Sunak came out and said, look, you know, China is a threat, it's an official threat to this country, what difference would that really make?
I think it would be taken far more seriously than the word salad that we've seen. To declare that China is a threat would be to show Britain's seriousness towards China's behavior internationally, towards its repression at home. I think one of the reasons why this hasn't been done is because the government's been trying to separate different aspects of its relationship with China. It wants to sound robust on human rights and other strategic issues, although it doesn't always do that. But it wants to develop investment, trade, market access with China. But what it misses out on is that China doesn't see that distinction. In fact, Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party, uses investment, uses trade, uses market access as tools of intimidation, as tools against foreign countries. Look at what happened with Lithuania, with Australia. These are tools of coercion.
Tell us more about Lithuania and Australia, Ian, because I think a lot of our viewers and listeners may not be familiar just what you referenced there. Just expand on that a little bit for us.
Well, we had a situation 2 years ago where the Australians demanded an independent investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 virus. And China reacted with fury at this and imposed trade sanctions against billions of dollars of Australian goods. Now, it didn't work because Australia stood up to them. Likewise with Lithuania, tiny Lithuania, agreed to allow Taiwan to open a diplomatic mission in its own name in Vilnius. And they were subjected to quite severe trade sanctions and intimidation. And again, they stood up to China. And in both examples, it shows that standing up to China as opposed to appeasing Beijing can actually work, because Australia came out of that quite strengthened because they found considerable new markets, whether it's for their coal, for their barley, to some extent for their wine. And in fact, the treatment of Lithuania resulted in the EU getting rather tougher with China than it has done in the past. And I think appeasing doesn't work, and really China needs to be called out about its behavior.
Is it just the nature of, play a bully at their own game, essentially, stand up to them and they'll notice a bit of aggression? And I wonder how the UK, you think, should do that.
I think that we need to describe it for what it is. We have been far too mealy-mouthed about China's behavior, whether it's in Hong Kong, where the government has not been nearly as robust, has not nearly lived up to its responsibilities to the people of Hong Kong, and whether it's calling out China over quite blatant examples of cyber spying, intimidation. I mean, the theft of the data of 40 million people from the Electoral Commission. I mean, this is big stuff. This is interfering in British democracy. And when that information is used and analyzed alongside other data that China has stolen, the ability to identify individuals, whether it's for intimidation or whether it's for espionage purposes, is quite chilling. And I think that the relationship with China, the changed relationship in China, needs to start with recognizing what China has become under Xi Jinping. It has become an aggressive, threatening power internationally, and very much more repressive at home, in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, elsewhere. And I think a more robust policy towards China begins with calling them out, with describing it for what it is, and recognizing China for what it has become under Xi Jinping. You know, appeasement doesn't buy you any brownie points or any advantages in Beijing, quite the contrary.
Ian, I just wonder why. You talked about the sort of total strategy of China in regard to its hacking, in regard to how it uses trade to actually, almost as a Trojan horse, to get into different economies and so on. I mean, some would question why disinformation was allegedly put out by China in regard to Kate Middleton, in regard to the Princess of Wales, for example. Is this just this sort of death by a thousand cuts kind of idea that you just destabilize the state as much as you can?
It is, and I think the nature of China's cyber activities have changed a lot in recent years. If we turn the clock back a decade, for instance, China was very much playing within the system. They saw acquiring foreign know-how and technology by all available means as a key to their development, and that included a massive cyber hacking operation, which culminated actually in 2015 with Britain, America, trying to strike a cyber non-aggression treaty with China, which didn't work. Now, in contrast with Russia, Russia's always been the vandal, if you like. They haven't got much of a stake in the international system. So they've always worked to undermine democratic societies through quite widespread disinformation and interference. These used to be reasonably distinct approaches, but I think under Xi Jinping, whose worldview is much closer to that of Vladimir Putin, who is much more anti-West,
Yes.
I think China has become much more overt in its tactics, in its strategy to undermine Western democratic systems, to sow doubt, to sow divisions in a way that used to be a hallmark of, or still is a hallmark of, the Russian system. But Russia and China, in this sense, are moving much more closely together in the way they use disinformation, and they use these methods to try and undermine democratic systems. And I think that's where the stuff that was put out about Kate Middleton comes in.
Yes.
It's any opportunity to sow division, to sow doubt, to undermine democratic societies. And of course, there are a lot of means for doing that, because we live in an open society.
Ian, we'll have to leave it there, but you're now going to be my go-to guy on China. I have learned more from this interview with you than I have on any other time I've discussed China, and that's many times on many of my programs. So thank you to Ian Williams there. He's the author of The Fire of the Dragon, China's New Cold War, which I'm about to go out and buy. So thank you very much indeed. Ian, appreciate that.